You're now listening to his dangerous claim. Kindly state in the comment section what part of the continent you're watching from. Let's connect. Story synopsis. When struggling waitress Lila Hayes stands up to a powerful senator at an elite charity gala, she never expects her defiance to catch the attention of billionaire Damian Voss, one of the most dangerous men in the city. But after he intervenes to save her from humiliation, Lila discovers that crossing paths with Damian comes with a price she never anticipated. Facing foreclosure on her family home and drowning in debt, Lila has no choice but to accept Damian's offer to become his personal assistant, even though everything about him screams danger. The job comes with a salary that will solve all her problems, but it also comes with secrets, lies, and enemies who see her as the perfect weapon to use against him. Kindly like, subscribe and push the notification bell for more interesting stories like this. You stupid little bitch, do you have any idea who I am? The champagne glass slipped from my trembling fingers, crystal shattering against the marble floor of the ballroom. Golden liquid splashed across my black uniform, and I felt every eye in the room turn toward us. The man towering over me, Senator Blackwood, according to his name tag, had his face twisted in rage, spittle flying from his lips. My heart hammered against my ribs. Sir, I'm so sorry. You bumped into me, and I bumped into you? His voice rose another octave, cutting through the soft classical music. You clumsy waitress, you ruined my $5,000 suit. I looked down at the small splash of champagne on his jacket. It was barely noticeable, but from the way he was carrying on, you'd think I'd doused him in red wine. Around us, the charity gala continued, but I could feel the weight of curious stares burning into my skin. My cheeks flamed with humiliation. I'll pay for the cleaning, I whispered, knowing damn well I didn't have $5 to spare, let alone enough for whatever ridiculous dry cleaning bill he'd manufacture. You'll pay? He laughed, a cruel sound that made my stomach churn. What are you, some community college dropout working for tips? You couldn't afford to breathe the same air as my suit. The words hit like physical blows. I wanted to shrink into the floor, to disappear entirely. But then something inside me snapped. Maybe it was exhaustion from working 3 jobs, or the stress of my brother's tuition bills, or just the unfairness of it all. Actually, I said, lifting my chin despite my shaking hands, I'm a college graduate with a degree in business administration. And maybe if you watched where you were going instead of groping the female servers, we wouldn't have this problem. The silence that followed was deafening. Senator Blackwood's face turned purple, his jowls quivering with fury. How dare you? Is there a problem here? The voice was low, controlled, but it carried enough authority to make everyone within earshot freeze. I turned toward the sound and felt my breath catch in my throat. The man standing behind me was tall, easily 6'3", with broad shoulders that filled out his perfectly tailored tuxedo. His dark hair was styled in that effortless way that probably cost more than my rent, and his jawline could have been carved from granite. But it was his eyes that made my pulse stutter. Steel gray and piercing, they seemed to see straight through me. Mr. Voss, Senator Blackwood stammered, his aggressive posture deflating like a punctured balloon. I didn't see you there. This waitress just assaulted me and, assaulted you? The stranger, Mr. Voss, raised one dark eyebrow. His gaze flicked to me, taking in my champagne-stained uniform and flushed face, before returning to the senator. Interesting. From what I observed, you were the one who grabbed her arm when she tried to walk away. That's not, I never, Blackwood sputtered. I have excellent eyesight, Senator. And I'm not the only one who witnessed your enthusiasm. Mr. Voss gestured subtly toward the security cameras mounted around the ballroom. I believe you were just leaving. It wasn't a suggestion. The quiet menace in his tone made that abundantly clear. Senator Blackwood's face went through several shades of red before settling on a sickly white. He straightened his jacket, the one with the barely visible champagne stain, and stalked away without another word. The crowd began to disperse, conversations resuming as the drama ended. I stood frozen, staring up at my unexpected savior. Up close, he was even more intimidating. Everything about him screamed power and danger, from his perfectly pressed shirt to the way he carried himself like he owned the world. Thank you, I managed to whisper. You didn't have to. No, I didn't. He studied me with those penetrating gray eyes, and I felt stripped bare under his gaze. What's your name? Lila. Lila Hayes. Lila. He repeated it slowly, like he was tasting the syllables. You work for the catering company? I nodded, suddenly aware of how I must look, hair escaping from my ponytail, uniform wrinkled and stained, hands still trembling from the confrontation. Next to his polished perfection, I felt like a mess. This is your first time working an event like this, he said. It wasn't a question. How did you? I started, then shook my head. Yes. I needed the extra money. Something flickered in his expression. Curiosity? Amusement? I couldn't tell. You stood up to him, he said. Why? The question caught me off guard. I don't know. I was scared, but I was also angry. People like him think they can treat others however they want just because they have money and power. And what do you think about people like me? The question hung in the air between us. I looked at him, really looked at him. The expensive watch on his wrist, the way other guests gave him a wide berth of respect, the casual confidence that came from never having to worry about anything. I think you're probably just as dangerous as he is, I said honestly, just better at hiding it. He smiled then, a slow, predatory curve of his lips that made my heart skip. Smart girl. Lila. The sharp voice of my supervisor, Mrs. Martinez, cut through our conversation. She hurried over, her face pale with worry. What happened? Are you hurt? She's fine, Mr. Voss said before I could respond. Just a minor misunderstanding with Senator Blackwood. Mrs. Martinez's eyes widened. She knew exactly who she was talking to, even if I was still in the dark. Mr. Voss, I'm so sorry for any inconvenience. I'll make sure Lila finishes her shift without any further. Actually, he interrupted, his gaze never leaving mine, I think Miss Hayes should call it a night. She's had enough excitement. But I need the money, I protested. The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I immediately felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. Great, now he knew exactly how desperate I was. Mrs. Martinez, he said, still looking at me, please see that Miss Hayes receives payment for a full shift, plus a bonus for her discretion regarding tonight's events. My supervisor nodded eagerly. Of course, Mr. Voss. Right away. That's not necessary, I said quickly. I can finish my shift. I'm sure you can. He stepped closer, and I caught a hint of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made my head spin. But you won't. The authority in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't a man used to being questioned or disobeyed. Everything about him radiated power and control, and despite my better judgment, I found it magnetic. Why are you helping me? I asked. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like he was memorizing every detail. Maybe I have a weakness for brave waitresses who don't know when to keep their mouths shut. Or maybe you just like playing hero. Another smile, this one sharper. I'm many things, Lila Hayes, but a hero isn't one of them. The way he said my name sent heat coursing through my veins. There was something dark and dangerous about him, something that screamed warning even as it drew me in like a moth to flame. Mrs. Martinez appeared at my elbow with an envelope. Your payment, Lila. You can go change out of your uniform. I took the envelope with shaking hands, feeling the weight of it. Whatever bonus he'd arranged, it was more than generous. Thank you, I said, looking up at him. I don't know how to repay you. Don't thank me yet, he said softly. His gray eyes seemed to darken. And don't worry about repayment. I always collect what's owed to me. The words should have sounded reassuring. Instead, they sent a chill down my spine. I clutched the envelope to my chest and headed toward the service exit, my legs unsteady beneath me. I could feel his eyes on my back the entire way, burning into me like a brand. At the doorway, I couldn't resist looking back. He was still watching me, his hands in his pockets, that enigmatic smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Even across the crowded ballroom, I felt the intensity of his stare like a physical touch. Then he was moving toward me, cutting through the crowd with predatory grace. My pulse jumped, and I took an involuntary step backward. He didn't stop until he was close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "One more thing, Lila." I swallowed hard. "Yes?" He leaned down, his lips close to my ear. His breath was warm against my skin, making me shiver. "We're going to see each other again," he whispered, his voice like velvet over steel, "sooner than you think." Before I could respond, he straightened and walked away, disappearing into the crowd like he'd never been there at all. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart racing and my skin tingling from his proximity. Mrs. Martinez appeared beside me, shaking her head in amazement. "Do you have any idea who that was?" "Mr. Voss," I said weakly. "Damian Voss," she corrected. "One of the most powerful men in the city. Billionaire businessman, real estate mogul, and..." She lowered her voice. "Some say he has connections to people you don't want to cross." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of connections?" "The kind that make problems disappear," she said ominously. "Lila, whatever just happened between you two, be careful. Men like Damian Voss don't do anything without a reason." I looked back toward the ballroom, but he was nowhere to be seen. Only the lingering scent of his cologne and the memory of his whispered promise remained. "We're going to see each other again. Sooner than you think." As I changed out of my stained uniform in the employee bathroom, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. It wasn't fear exactly, though there was plenty of that. It was something else, something that made my skin flush and my heart race. I'd never met anyone like Damian Voss before. He was magnetic and terrifying, protective and threatening all at once. And despite every instinct screaming at me to stay away, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at me. Like I was something precious and dangerous. Like I mattered. The envelope crinkled in my hands as I pulled on my jacket. Inside was more money than I made in a month of waiting tables. It should have felt like salvation, enough to cover my brother Jake's tuition payment that was due next week, enough to buy us some breathing room. Instead, it felt like I'd just signed a contract I hadn't read the fine print on. I walked out of the hotel into the cool night air, my mind spinning. The city stretched out before me, glittering lights and endless possibilities. But all I could think about was steel gray eyes and a whispered promise that felt more like a threat. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. "Sleep well, Lila. Tomorrow changes everything." My blood ran cold. I looked around the empty street, but there was no one there. No expensive cars, no men in perfect tuxedos. Just me, alone with the sudden certainty that my life had just taken a turn into dangerous territory. I clutched my jacket tighter and hurried toward the subway, Damian Voss's words echoing in my mind. "We're going to see each other again. Sooner than you think." As the train carried me back to my tiny apartment in Queens, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was already in deeper than I knew. And despite the warning bells going off in my head, part of me, a part one didn't want to acknowledge, was anticipating that next encounter. Even if it destroyed me, the doors slid shut with a hiss, sealing me into the fluorescent-lit car. But I could still feel those gray eyes watching me, could still hear that velvet voice making promises I didn't understand. Tomorrow changes everything. I pressed my forehead against the cool window and watched the city blur past, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. And wondering why, despite everything screaming at me to run, I was already looking forward to finding out. "Miss Hayes? This is regarding your family's property at 1247 Maple Street." The official voice on the other end of the phone made my stomach drop to my toes. I'd been dreading this call for weeks, ever since the certified letters started arriving. Letters I'd hidden from Jake because he had enough to worry about with his pre-med studies. "Yes, this is Lila Hayes," I managed, sinking onto my threadbare couch. Through the thin walls of my studio apartment, I could hear Mrs. Chen's television blaring and someone upstairs practicing violin, badly. "I'm calling from Morrison and Associates. We're handling the foreclosure proceedings on the property. You have 72 hours to bring the account current, or we'll be forced to proceed with the sale." My hand trembled as I gripped the phone. "How much?" The total amount due, including late fees and legal costs, is $57,412. The number hit me like a physical blow. I'd known it was bad, but not this bad. There has to be some mistake. My father owned that house free and clear. Ma'am, according to our records, your father took out a second mortgage 3 years ago. The payments haven't been made in 8 months. 3 years ago. Right around the time Dad's construction business started failing, when the medical bills from Mom's cancer treatment were piling up. He must have mortgaged the house to keep everything afloat, and I'd never known. 72 hours, the man repeated. After that, the property will be listed for auction. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, feeling like the walls were closing in around me. The house on Maple Street wasn't just property, it was home. It was where Mom had planted her rose garden, where Jake had learned to ride a bike, where Dad had taught me to change a tire in the driveway. It was all we had left of them. I buried my face in my hands, trying not to cry. $57,000 might as well have been $57 million. Even with the generous payment from last night's gala, I had maybe $3,000 in savings. Jake's tuition had cleaned out everything else. My phone rang again, and I almost didn't answer it. But the number looked familiar, Mrs. Martinez from the catering company. Lila, honey, are you sitting down? What's wrong? Please not more bad news. I couldn't handle more bad news. Nothing's wrong. I just got the strangest call. Someone wants to hire you for a private catering position. Full-time, excellent pay. My heart jumped. Who? He wouldn't say, but the salary he quoted. She paused. Lila, it's more than I make in a year. Are you sure you didn't make some kind of impression last night? Damian Voss. It had to be, but why would a billionaire want to hire me for catering? Unless. What kind of position exactly? He said personal assistant and event coordination. The interview is this afternoon at 2 o'clock. I'm texting you the address now. The address that came through made my eyes widen. It was in Tribeca, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Manhattan. Of course it was. Mrs. Martinez, I don't know anything about being a personal assistant. Honey, for this kind of money, you can learn. Besides, after what I saw last night, I think you can handle yourself just fine. After we hung up, I stared at the address on my screen. Every rational part of my brain was screaming warnings. Damian Voss was dangerous. Mrs. Martinez had said so herself. Men like him didn't do anything without a reason. But $57,000, 72 hours, I didn't have a choice. The building in Tribeca was everything I'd expected, sleek glass and steel reaching toward the sky, with a doorman who looked like he earned more than I did. My reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls showed a nervous girl in her best interview outfit, a black blazer from Target and heels that were already making my feet ache. The elevator climbed to the penthouse office, my ears popping from the altitude. When the doors opened, I stepped into what could only be described as a palace in the sky. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city. The furniture was modern and minimalist, all clean lines and expensive fabrics. Abstract art that probably cost more than my college tuition hung on the walls. Miss Hayes. I spun around, my heart immediately jumping into overdrive. Damian Voss stood in the doorway to what looked like a home office, and in the light of day, he was even more devastating than I remembered. Gone was the formal tuxedo, replaced by a charcoal gray suit that fit him like it had been crafted by angels. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and those steel gray eyes were focused on me with laser intensity. Mr. Voss, I tried to keep my voice steady. Thank you for whatever this is. A smile played at the corner of his mouth. You're not sure why you're here. I have some ideas, none of them particularly reassuring. He laughed, a low, rich sound that made warmth pool in my stomach. I like your honesty. Please, sit. He gestured to a leather sofa that probably cost more than my car. I perched on the edge, trying not to look as intimidated as I felt. He took the chair across from me, leaning back with casual confidence. Tell me about your family's financial situation, he said without preamble. The directness of it took my breath away. Excuse me? Your house is in foreclosure, $57,412, due in. He glanced at his watch, 68 hours now. I shot to my feet, anger flaring hot in my chest. Have you been investigating me? Sit down, Lila. The command in his voice was quiet but absolute. Despite myself, I found myself sinking back onto the sofa. He hadn't raised his voice, but something in his tone made it clear that disobedience wasn't an option. I make it my business to know about people who interest me, he said calmly. Your father took out a second mortgage to cover your mother's medical bills and keep his construction company afloat. He defaulted after he died, and you've been struggling to keep up ever since. Stop. The word came out as a whisper. Hearing our tragedy laid out so clinically made it hurt all over again. Why are you doing this? Because I want to help. People like you don't help people like me without wanting something in return. His gray eyes darkened. You're right. I do want something. My pulse hammered in my throat. What? I want you to work for me. I blinked, thrown by the simple answer. As a personal assistant? Among other things. He stood and walked to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back. Even in profile, he was magnificent, all sharp angles and controlled power. I need someone I can trust. Someone who isn't impressed by money or intimidated by power. Someone who will tell me the truth, even when I don't want to hear it. You barely know me. I know enough. He turned back to face me. I know you're working 3 jobs to put your brother through medical school. I know you stood up to a United States senator without backing down. I know you're brave and stubborn and completely out of your depth right now. The accuracy of his assessment stung. And that makes me qualified to be your assistant? That makes you interesting. Qualifications can be taught. He moved closer, his presence filling the space between us. I'm offering you a position as my personal assistant. Salary of $200,000 per year, plus benefits and bonuses. The number hit me like a thunderbolt. $200,000. It was more money than I'd ever dreamed of making. What would I have to do? Manage my schedule, coordinate meetings and events, handle correspondence, travel with me when necessary. He paused. Be available when I need you. There was something in the way he said that last part that made heat coil low in my belly. Available how? I work unusual hours, I travel frequently, when I call, you answer. When I need you, you come, no questions asked. It sounded reasonable enough, but warning bells were going off in my head. And if I refuse? Then you walk out of here, and I never contact you again. Your house goes into foreclosure in 68 hours. And you continue working 3 jobs to make ends meet. The blunt summary of my options made me flinch. He wasn't threatening me, exactly, but he was making it clear that this was my only lifeline. Why me? I asked again. You could hire anyone, someone with experience, with references. Because someone with experience would bore me, and someone with references would have divided loyalties. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne again, that intoxicating mixture of bergamot and something darker. I want someone who belongs to me. The word sent a shiver down my spine. I don't belong to anyone. Don't you? His voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was steel underneath. You need this job, Lila, you need the money, the security, the chance to save your family's home, that gives me a certain influence over you. You're talking about buying me. I'm talking about mutual benefit. I get a dedicated assistant who won't betray my trust. You get financial security and a chance to build a real career. He was right, and we both knew it. I was trapped by circumstances, and he was offering me a way out, but the price felt higher than just my time and energy. What aren't you telling me? I asked. His smile returned, sharp and predatory. Smart girl. There are aspects of my business that require discretion. You'll see things, hear things, that must never leave this room. Can you handle that? What kind of things? The kind that could be dangerous if shared with the wrong people. Dangerous, there was that word again. Are you asking me to do anything illegal? No, but I'm asking you to trust me, even when you don't understand what's happening around you. I stared at him, trying to read the expression in those gray eyes. He was offering me salvation wrapped in a package I didn't fully understand. $200,000, enough to save the house, help Jake finish school, maybe even start building a real future. But at what cost? I need time to think about it, I said. You have until 5 o'clock today. That's not enough time. It's all the time you have. He walked to his desk and pulled out a contract, setting it on the coffee table between us. The terms are all spelled out. Read it carefully. I picked up the thick document, my hands shaking slightly. The salary was right there on the first page, $200,000 per year, with a signing bonus of $60,000, enough to save the house with money left over. The signing bonus, I said, looking up at him, it's enough to cover the foreclosure. Yes. You knew the exact amount. I told you, I make it my business to know things. There was something both thrilling and terrifying about being the focus of so much attention from a man like Damian Voss. He'd researched me, learned my weaknesses, crafted the perfect offer. It was manipulation, pure and simple. And it was working. If I sign this, I said slowly, what happens to my other jobs? You quit them. Today, your only focus will be on working for me. And if it doesn't work out? Then you'll have learned valuable skills and made enough money to start over somewhere else. He leaned against his desk, studying me, but it will work out, Lila. I'm very good at getting what I want. The confidence in his voice was absolute. This was a man who didn't accept failure or defeat. If he wanted me to succeed in this position, I would succeed, whether I wanted to or not. I should probably run this by a lawyer, I said, hefting the contract. You should. But you won't. He straightened, moving toward me again with that predatory grace, because you don't have time, and you don't have options, you need this job, and we both know it. He was close now, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. This close, I could see flecks of silver in the gray, could see the way his pupils dilated slightly as he looked at me. Are you going to hurt me? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Something flickered in his expression. I'm going to protect you, Lila. Even from myself, if necessary. It wasn't exactly a no, and we both knew it. But there was something in his tone, something almost vulnerable, that made me believe him. I'm scared, I admitted. Good. You should be. His hand lifted, almost touching my cheek before he stopped himself. Fear will keep you alive in my world. And what world is that, exactly? One where the rules are different. Where power is the only currency that matters, and weakness gets you killed. My breath caught. Killed? It's a figure of speech, he said, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. Mostly. I should have run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to grab my purse and get out of there as fast as possible. But the contract was still in my hands, and the signing bonus was still $60,000. And my house was still $57,000 away from being lost forever. If I sign this, I said, I'm trusting you with my life. Yes. The simple acknowledgement sent chills down my spine. And you're trusting me with your secrets? Yes. What if we're both wrong? His smile was dark and beautiful. Then we'll burn together. I looked down at the contract, then back up at him. He was watching me intently, like a predator waiting to see which way its prey would run. But there was something else there too, something that looked almost like hope. I need a pen, I said quietly. The transformation in his expression was immediate. Triumph, possession, satisfaction, they all flashed across his face before he controlled them. He handed me an expensive-looking pen, his fingers brushing mine for just a moment. The contact sent electricity shooting up my arm, our eyes met and held, and for a heartbeat, the air between us crackled with something dangerous and electric. Then I was signing my name on the dotted line, sealing my fate with black ink. Welcome to my world, Lila Hayes, Damian said, his voice low and rich with satisfaction. I set the pen down with shaking hands, staring at my signature. What happens now? Now you belong to me. The words should have terrified me. Instead, they sent heat pooling in my core, and I realized with dawning horror that part of me, a part one didn't want to acknowledge, liked the sound of that. When do I start? Now. He walked back to his desk and pulled out a phone, handing it to me. This is your work phone. It stays with you at all times. When I call, you answer. When I text, you respond immediately. I took the phone, noting its weight, top of the line, of course. And my first assignment? You're going to accompany me to a business dinner tonight. Consider it your introduction to my associates. Tonight? I looked down at my Target blazer and clearance heels. I don't have anything appropriate to wear. That's being handled. As if on cue, the elevator dinged, and a woman in an expensive suit stepped out, carrying several garment bags. Miss Hayes? I'm Caroline from Bergdorf Goodman. Mr. Voss asked me to bring you a selection of evening wear. My jaw dropped. You had this planned. I had it hoped, Damian corrected, his smile smug. Caroline will help you choose something appropriate. We leave at 7. It's only 3 o'clock. Beauty takes time, he said, then paused, not that you need much help in that department. The casual compliment made my cheeks burn. Where exactly are we going? Lou Bernardine. I'm having dinner with some business associates from overseas, they're particular about protocol. Something in his tone made me uneasy. What kind of business associates? The kind who don't like to be kept waiting. He moved toward his office. Caroline will take care of you. I'll see you at 7, Lila. Don't disappoint me. He disappeared into his office, leaving me alone with Caroline and several $1,000s worth of designer evening wear. I stared after him, my heart still racing from signing the contract. What had I just gotten myself into? Miss Hayes? Caroline's voice was professionally cheerful. Shall we get started? Mr. Voss was very specific about the image he wants you to project tonight. I followed her toward what I assumed was a bedroom, my mind spinning. In the space of an hour, my entire life had changed. I was now employed by one of the most powerful men in the city, with a salary that would solve all my financial problems. But as Caroline began laying out dresses that cost more than my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just signed away more than my time. I'd signed away my freedom. And the most terrifying part was that I wasn't sure I minded. You look stunning. Damian's voice was low and warm, but there was something darker underneath that made my pulse skip. I stood frozen in the doorway of his bedroom, suddenly hyper-aware of every inch of the midnight blue dress Caroline had selected. It hugged my curves like it had been made for me, the silk fabric whispering against my skin with every breath. Caroline has excellent taste, I managed, my voice shakier than I'd like. Caroline chose well, he agreed, his gray eyes traveling slowly from my face down to the hem that hit just above my knees, then back up again. But the dress is just fabric. You make it beautiful. Heat flooded my cheeks. In the past 4 hours, I'd been primped and polished by Caroline and her team, hair styled in an elegant updo, makeup applied with professional precision, nails manicured to perfection. I barely recognized myself in the mirror. But it was the way Damian was looking at me that made me feel truly transformed. Like I was something precious and dangerous all at once. Are you ready? He asked, offering his arm. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The moment my hand touched his arm, electricity shot through me. Even through the expensive fabric of his suit jacket, I could feel the solid muscle underneath, the warmth of his skin. The ride to Lou Bernardine passed in tense silence. Damian sat beside me in the back of his black Mercedes, close enough that I could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. Every time we hit a bump, his knee brushed against mine, sending sparks racing up my leg. Nervous? He asked as we pulled up to the restaurant. Should I be? His smile was sharp. Probably. Before I could ask what that meant, the driver was opening my door. Damian appeared beside me, his hand settling possessively on the small of my back as he guided me toward the entrance. The touch was light, professional even, but it sent heat coursing through my entire body. Lou Bernardine was everything I'd expected from a restaurant with 4 Michelin stars, elegant, intimate, and intimidatingly expensive. The maitre d' led us to a private dining room where 3 men were already seated at a round table. Gentlemen, Damian said smoothly. Allow me to introduce my assistant, Lila Hayes. Lila, this is Victor Kozlov, Chen Wei, and Marcus Romano. I smiled politely as each man stood to shake my hand, but something about them made my skin crawl. They were all impeccably dressed, clearly wealthy, but there was a coldness in their eyes that reminded me of sharks. Victor Kozlov held my hand a beat too long, his pale blue eyes lingering on my face. Such a pleasure to meet you, Miss Hayes. Damian didn't mention how lovely his new assistant is. I don't usually discuss my staff, Damian replied, his voice carrying a subtle warning. His hand found my back again, the touch more possessive now. Shall we sit? The dinner that followed was a masterclass in subtle intimidation. The conversation flowed between English and what sounded like Russian, with occasional lapses into Mandarin. I caught fragments, mentions of shipments, territories, and percentages that made my stomach clench. This wasn't a normal business dinner. These weren't normal businessmen. Your assistant is very quiet, Marcus Romano observed, his Italian accent thick as honey. He was younger than the others, maybe early 40s, with dark hair and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Does she speak? When she has something worth saying, I replied before Damian could answer. The table went silent. Victor's eyebrows rose, Chen's expression didn't change, but Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I like her, he said, raising his wine glass in my direction. She has spirit. Yes, Damian said, his hand sliding from my back to rest on my thigh under the table. She does. The possessive gesture sent heat flooding through me, even as warning bells rang in my head. The pressure of his fingers through the silk of my dress was both thrilling and terrifying. Perhaps we should discuss business elsewhere, Victor suggested, his cold eyes flicking between Damian and me. Some conversations are better kept private. Lila is completely trustworthy, Damian said firmly. She can hear whatever needs to be said. Can she? Chen spoke for the first time, his voice soft but somehow menacing. Trust is earned, not given. And new faces make me uncomfortable. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I could feel the tension coiling between the men like a live wire, ready to spark into something dangerous. Perhaps, I said carefully, I should powder my nose. Give you gentlemen time to discuss business. Victor smiled, showing too many teeth. How considerate. I started to stand, but Damian's hand tightened on my thigh, keeping me in place. The pressure was firm but not painful, a clear message that I wasn't going anywhere. That won't be necessary, he said smoothly. We're all friends here, aren't we, gentlemen? The word friends carried enough menace to make my blood run cold. This was a test of some kind, a power play I didn't understand. And I was caught in the middle of it. Of course, Marcus said with that unsettling smile. Though I do wonder if your lovely assistant understands the nature of our friendship. She understands enough, Damian replied. But I didn't. I didn't understand any of this. The undercurrents of threat and violence that seemed to flow just beneath the polite conversation. The way these men looked at me like I was either a weakness to exploit or a problem to solve. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of increasingly cryptic conversation and subtle threats. By the time we finally left the restaurant, my nerves were stretched to the breaking point. Well? Damian asked as we settled into the back of his car. What did you think of my associates? I think they're criminals, I said bluntly. He laughed, the sound rich and warm in the confined space. What gave it away? The part where they talked about territories and shipments like they were discussing the weather. Or maybe it was when that Victor guy looked at me like he was calculating my street value. Damian's expression darkened. No one will touch you. Ever. The vehemence in his voice sent shivers down my spine. Why? Because I work for you? Because you're mine. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I turned to look at him, really look at him, in the dim light of the car. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched into fists on his thighs. I'm not a possession, I said quietly. Aren't you? He leaned closer, close enough that I could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes. You signed a contract. You took my money. You wear the clothes I bought you, carry the phone I gave you. What would you call that? Employment. Is that what you tell yourself? His voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was steel underneath. When you feel your heart race every time I look at you? When you shiver at my touch? When you lay awake at night thinking about me? My breath caught. He was right, and we both knew it. Ever since that first night at the gala, he'd been living in my head, occupying my thoughts in ways that had nothing to do with professional obligation. That's not. Don't lie to me, Lila. He reached up, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw with devastating gentleness. I can see it in your eyes. Feel it in the way you tremble when I touch you. I was trembling. My entire body was vibrating like a tuning fork, every nerve ending alive and aching for more of his touch. This is dangerous, I whispered. Yes. His thumb traced over my lower lip, making me gasp. Everything about me is dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous. But you knew that when you signed the contract. I signed up to be your assistant, not your... What? His eyes were dark now, pupils dilated with something that made heat pool low in my belly. What did you think you were signing up for, Lila? Before I could answer, the car pulled to a stop outside his building, but neither of us moved. We sat there in the back seat, the air thick with tension and unspoken desires. Come upstairs, he said finally. It wasn't a request. It's late, I protested weakly. I should go home. Home to your empty apartment? Your stack of bills? Your uncertain future? He leaned back, studying me with those penetrating eyes. Or you could come upstairs and let me show you what your new life could look like. I knew I should say no. Every rational thought in my head was screaming at me to go home, to put distance between us, to remember that this was supposed to be a professional relationship. But when he stepped out of the car and offered his hand, I took it. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt endless. We stood on opposite sides of the small space, but I could feel his presence like a physical weight. Every time our eyes met in the mirrored walls, heat flashed between us. His apartment looked different at night. The city lights sparkled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the space into something magical and otherworldly. Damian moved to the bar in the corner, his movements fluid and precise. Drink? He asked. I should keep a clear head. Should you? He poured himself 2 fingers of what looked like very expensive whiskey. When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to, Lila? Not because you had to, not because someone needed you to, but because you wanted it? The question caught me off guard. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done anything purely for myself. Everything in my life was driven by obligation, necessity, survival. I don't know, I admitted. That's what I thought. He moved toward me, drink in hand, every step measured and deliberate. You've spent so long taking care of everyone else that you've forgotten how to take care of yourself. Someone has to. Someone has to take care of you too. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. Let me do that, Lila. In exchange for what? His smile was soft, almost sad. Your trust. Your loyalty. Your presence in my life. You want to own me. I want to possess you, he corrected. There's a difference. Ownership implies you have no choice. Possession means you choose to be mine. The distinction should have mattered more than it did, but standing there in his penthouse, surrounded by luxury I'd never dreamed of, looking up into eyes that saw more of me than I was comfortable with, the line between choice and coercion felt dangerously blurred. What if I can't be what you need? I asked. You already are. He set his drink on a nearby table, freeing his hands to frame my face. Strong enough to stand up to senators. Brave enough to trust me with your future. Beautiful enough to make me forget every rule I've ever made for myself. His thumbs traced over my cheekbones, and I melted into his touch despite myself. When was the last time someone had touched me like this? Like I was precious, fragile, worth cherishing? Damian, I whispered, his name a plea I didn't fully understand. Tell me what you want, he said softly. The honest answer was terrifying. I wanted him to keep touching me. I wanted him to kiss me until I forgot about foreclosures and medical bills and the crushing weight of responsibility. I wanted him to make me feel like more than just a girl struggling to survive. I wanted him to make me feel alive. I want to stop being afraid, I said finally, then stop. His hand slid from my face to my shoulders, then down my arms to capture my hands. Stop being afraid of me. Stop being afraid of this. Stop being afraid of what you want. And what do I want? His smile was slow, predatory, devastating. Me. Before I could deny it, he was kissing me. The world exploded into sensation. His lips were firm and demanding, claiming mine with a hunger that stole my breath. I melted against him, my hands fisting in the fabric of his jacket as he deepened the kiss. He tasted like whiskey and danger, like promises I shouldn't make and boundaries I shouldn't cross. But I couldn't bring myself to pull away. Instead, I kissed him back with a desperation that surprised us both. His hands tangled in my hair, destroying Caroline's careful styling, but I didn't care. Nothing mattered except the heat of his mouth on mine, the solid strength of his body pressed against me, the way he made me feel like I was drowning in the best possible way. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. His eyes were dark with desire, his hair mussed where my fingers had raked through it. This is a mistake, I whispered against his lips. Probably. His forehead rested against mine, his breath warm on my face. Do you care? I should have cared about professional boundaries and power dynamics and the fact that I barely knew him. I should have cared about the criminal associates and the dangerous world he'd admitted I was stepping into. But all I could think about was the way he'd kissed me like I was the only thing that mattered in the world. No, I admitted. I don't care. He smiled, triumphant and possessive. Good. His phone rang, the sound sharp and intrusive in the intimate space between us. For a moment, he ignored it, his hand still framing my face. But when it rang again, his expression hardened. I have to take this, he said, stepping back reluctantly. The loss of his warmth left me feeling cold and exposed. I watched as he pulled out his phone, his entire demeanor changing as he read the caller ID. Victor, he answered, his voice clipped and professional. It's late. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but I could see Damian's jaw tighten as he listened. His free hand clenched into a fist at his side. That's not acceptable, he said coldly. We had an agreement. More talking from Victor's end. Damian turned away from me, walking toward the windows. Handle it, he said finally. And Victor? If you ever threaten what's mine again, agreement or no agreement, I'll make sure it's the last mistake you ever make. The venom in his voice made my blood run cold. This was a side of him I hadn't seen before, ruthless, dangerous, capable of violence. When he ended the call and turned back to me, I took an involuntary step backward. What's wrong? He asked, but his eyes already knew. You heard me listening, I said quietly. His expression went carefully blank. Yes. What kind of business are you really in, Damian? For a long moment, he didn't answer. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications and unspoken truths. The kind that requires complete trust, he said finally. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you right now. He moved toward me again, but I held up a hand to stop him. Don't. Please. My mind was spinning, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. The cold calculation in his voice, the casual threat of violence. I need to go home. Lila. I need to think. This is all too much, too fast. I looked around for my purse, desperate for escape. I'll call you tomorrow. He didn't try to stop me as I headed for the elevator, but I could feel his eyes on me the entire way. Just as the doors started to close, he spoke. Running away won't change what's between us, Lila. The doors closed, cutting off my view of his face. But his words echoed in my mind all the way down to the lobby, all the way home to my tiny apartment, all the way into my restless dreams. He was right. Running away wouldn't change the fact that I wanted him, despite the danger. Despite the questions he wouldn't answer. Despite the growing certainty that I was falling for a man who might destroy me. But as I lay awake in my narrow bed, I couldn't shake the memory of that phone call. The cold menace in his voice when he'd threatened Victor. If you ever threaten what's mine again. He'd been talking about me. I was what Victor had threatened. But what had Victor said? What had he done that made Damian react with such controlled violence? And more importantly, what did it mean that Damian Voss considered me worth threatening people over? I was so lost in thought that I almost missed the soft sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Almost missed the shadow that paused outside my door. But I didn't miss the soft click of someone testing my doorknob. My heart stopped. Someone was trying to get into my apartment. And somehow, I didn't think it was Damian. The doorknob turned again, slower this time, more deliberate. I lay frozen in my bed, every muscle in my body coiled tight with terror. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 2:47 a.m., its red numbers casting eerie shadows on the wall. My apartment was silent except for the thundering of my heart and the soft scraping sound of what had to be lock picks working against my deadbolt. Whoever was out there was taking their time, being careful not to make noise that would alert the neighbors. My phone. I needed my phone. Moving as quietly as possible, I slipped my hand under my pillow where I'd left the work phone Damian had given me. My fingers found it just as I heard the soft snick of the lock giving way. Someone was in my apartment. I pressed Damian's number with shaking fingers, pulling the covers over my head to muffle any sound. The phone rang once, twice. Lila? His voice was alert, fully awake despite the hour. What's wrong? Someone's in my apartment, I whispered, the words barely audible even to myself. The change in his voice was immediate and terrifying. Gone was any trace of sleepiness or warmth. What remained was cold, deadly calm. Where are you now? Bedroom. Doors locked. Stay exactly where you are. Don't make a sound. I'm coming. Damian, Do not hang up this phone. I heard muffled sounds through the thin bedroom door, footsteps moving carefully through my living room, the soft creak of floorboards. Whoever was out there was searching for something. Or someone. How far are you? I breathed into the phone. 10 minutes. Can you get to the fire escape? I looked toward my bedroom window. It faced the alley behind my building, 3 stories up. The fire escape was rusty and probably hadn't been maintained in decades. I think so. Do it. Now. Stay on the line. Moving like my life depended on it, because it probably did, I slipped out of bed and crept toward the window. My hands shook as I struggled with the old locks, the metal corroded and stiff from years of neglect. A soft thud from the living room made me freeze. Something had been knocked over. Lila, Damian's voice was urgent but quiet. Talk to me. I'm trying to open the window, I whispered. The locks are stuck. Use something to pry them loose. A knife, anything. I grabbed a butter knife from the small desk by my window and worked it between the lock mechanisms. The metal groaned softly, but finally gave way. Cool night air rushed in as I pushed the window open. The fire escape looked even worse up close, rust flaking off the railings, bolts that looked ready to give way. But it was better than staying trapped in here with whoever was prowling through my apartment. I was halfway out the window when my bedroom door handle turned. My blood turned to ice. The door was locked, but it was just a cheap interior lock. It wouldn't hold for long if someone really wanted to get through. Damian, I whispered urgently. I'm almost there. Get onto the fire escape. Go down 1 level and wait. I pulled myself through the window just as I heard the soft sound of someone working on my bedroom lock. My bare feet hit the cold metal grating of the fire escape, and I had to bite back a cry at the sensation. The structure swayed slightly under my weight, making ominous creaking sounds. 1 level down, just like he'd said. I gripped the rusted railing and tried to make myself as small as possible, pressing back against the brick wall. From here, I could see my bedroom window above, a rectangle of yellow light in the dark building. A shadow moved across the light. They were inside my room. "I'm on the fire escape," I whispered into the phone. "Good girl. Stay quiet. I'm 2 blocks away." The shadow in my window moved again, and I saw the silhouette of someone searching through my things. They were being methodical about it, checking drawers, looking under the bed. What were they looking for? Then the shadow moved toward the window. My heart stopped. If they looked down, they'd see me pressed against the building like a terrified animal. The shadow paused at the window frame, and I caught a glimpse of a face in profile, sharp features, pale skin, short cropped hair. Male, probably in his 30s. I didn't recognize him, but something about his movements was familiar. Professional. Careful. He was looking out into the alley, scanning the darkness. I held my breath and pressed myself harder against the brick wall, feeling the rough surface scrape against my thin nightgown. After what felt like an eternity, he moved away from the window. "Lila." Damian's voice was closer now, coming from somewhere below. "Where are you?" I looked down and saw him in the alley, dressed all in black, his face a pale oval in the darkness. Even 3 stories up, I could see the tension in his posture, the way he held himself ready for violence. "Here," I whispered, waving my hand slightly. He looked up and spotted me immediately, his expression shifting from cold calculation to something more complex when he saw me huddled on the fire escape in nothing but a nightgown. "Stay there," he said, and then he was moving toward the building's entrance with deadly purpose. I don't know how he got into the building, whether he picked the locks like my intruder had, or used some other method, but within minutes I heard sounds of confrontation from inside my apartment. Raised voices, the crash of furniture being overturned, a sharp bang that might have been a gunshot. Then silence. "Damian?" I called softly, fear making my voice shake. No answer. The seconds stretched into minutes, and my imagination ran wild with possibilities. What if whoever had broken in had hurt him? What if there had been more than one person? What if? "Lila." His voice came from my bedroom window above. I looked up and saw him leaning out, his dark hair disheveled, a cut on his cheek that was bleeding slowly. "Are you hurt?" I asked. "I'm fine. Come back up. It's safe now." I climbed the rusty stairs on shaking legs, my bare feet slipping on the metal grating. Damian reached out to help me through the window, his hands strong and warm on my arms as he pulled me inside. The moment my feet touched the floor, he wrapped me in his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. I melted against him, feeling safe for the first time since I'd heard that doorknob turning. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands roaming over my arms and back, checking for injuries. "No, I'm okay. Just scared." I pulled back to look at his face, reaching up to touch the cut on his cheek. "What happened? Who was it?" His jaw tightened. "Someone who won't be coming back." The grimness in his voice made me look around my apartment. It was a disaster, furniture overturned, drawers dumped out, books scattered across the floor. But there was no sign of whoever had broken in. Where did he go? "He left through the front door." Quickly. "You let him leave?" Damian's smile was sharp and cold. I gave him a message to deliver. Sometimes it's more effective than other methods. I shuddered at the implications. "What kind of message?" "The kind that makes it clear you're under my protection." His hands framed my face, tilting it up so I had to meet his eyes. "Are you sure you're not hurt?" "I'm sure." But I was shaking now, adrenaline and shock catching up with me. "Damian, what's happening? Why would someone break into my apartment?" His expression grew darker. "Because they know you work for me now. Because they think you might be useful leverage." "Leverage for what?" "To control me." The simple answer sent chills down my spine. "And would it work?" He didn't answer immediately, but the way his hands tightened on my face told me everything I needed to know. "You're coming home with me," he said finally. "Tonight." It's not safe for you here anymore. I can't just leave. You can and you will. The authority in his voice was absolute. Pack a bag. Whatever you need for a few days. I looked at the chaos surrounding us, my personal belongings scattered like trash, my privacy violated, my sense of safety shattered. The reality of what I'd gotten myself into was finally hitting me. This is because of the dinner tonight, isn't it? Because your associates saw me with you. Probably. Victor. Damian's head snapped toward me. What about Victor? The phone call. He said something that made you angry, something about me. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the warm night air. He threatened me, didn't he? Victor Kozlov is a rabid dog pretending to be a businessman, Damian said grimly. He sees weakness where others see strength, and he mistakes possessiveness for vulnerability. And he thinks I'm your weakness. He thinks you're a way to get to me. Damian moved closer, his presence both comforting and dangerous. He's not entirely wrong. The admission hung between us, heavy with implication. I was important to him, important enough that his enemies would target me to hurt him. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it sent warmth flooding through my chest. Pack a bag, Lila, he said again, more gently this time. Please. I can't protect you if you're not with me. I looked around at my destroyed apartment, at the life I'd built that was now in ruins. Everything I owned could fit in 2 suitcases anyway. Okay, I said quietly. But just for a few days. His smile was soft, almost sad. Of course. Just a few days. But we both knew it was a lie. This wasn't temporary. Whatever line I'd crossed by taking his job, by kissing him, by becoming someone his enemies would target, there was no going back now. I grabbed a duffel bag from my closet and began throwing clothes into it, trying not to think about how my entire life was changing again in the span of hours. Damian helped, moving with efficient purpose as he gathered toiletries and other essentials. Your laptop, he said, holding up my old computer. Is there anything on here they might want? Just schoolwork and job applications. Nothing important. He tucked it under his arm anyway. We'll take it. Within 20 minutes, my whole life was packed into 2 bags. Damian carried them both, his free hand staying protectively on my back as we left the building. I looked back once at the place that had been home for 2 years, knowing somehow that I'd never live there again. The ride back to his penthouse passed in tense silence. I stared out the window at the city lights, processing everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, I'd been a waitress working multiple jobs to make ends meet. Now I was fleeing my apartment in the middle of the night because billionaire criminals saw me as leverage against the man I was falling for. The man I was falling for. When had that happened? When had Damian Voss stopped being just my mysterious, dangerous employer and become something more? Maybe it was when he'd appeared in that alley like an avenging angel, ready to fight for me. Maybe it was when he'd held me like I was precious and fragile. Or maybe it had been inevitable from the moment he'd first looked at me across that ballroom. Regrets? He asked softly, as if reading my thoughts. I considered the question. 24 hours ago, my biggest worry had been paying my bills. Now I was sitting in the back of a Mercedes, wearing a designer dress, running from people who wanted to hurt me to get to him. It should have been terrifying. It should have made me demand he take me to the police, or the airport, or anywhere far away from his dangerous world. Instead, all I could think about was the way he'd kissed me. The way he'd promised to protect me. The way he looked at me like I was the most important thing in his universe. No, I said finally. No regrets. His hand found mine in the darkness, his fingers intertwining with mine. Good. Because there's no going back now, Lila. You're mine to protect, which means you're mine to keep. And if I don't want to be kept? His smile was sharp and possessive. Then you shouldn't have kissed me back. The truth of it hit me like a physical blow. I had kissed him back. I had melted in his arms and let him make me feel things I'd never felt before. I had chosen this path, even if I hadn't fully understood where it would lead. What happens now? I asked. Now you learn to live in my world. And I teach you how to survive it. The penthouse looked different when we arrived, less like a showpiece and more like a fortress. Damian moved through the space with military precision, checking locks, activating security systems, making sure we were safe. Hungry? He asked once he was satisfied with his security measures. I realized I was starving. The dinner at Lou Bernardine felt like a lifetime ago. A little. He led me to the kitchen, a sleek, modern space with top-of-the-line appliances that looked like they'd never been used. But Damian moved around it with surprising familiarity, pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. You cook? I asked, surprised. I have many skills, he said with a slight smile. Cooking is one of the safer ones. I watched as he prepared what looked like a simple pasta dish, his movements economical and precise. There was something oddly intimate about sharing this domestic moment with him after everything that had happened. Tell me about Victor, I said as he worked. What does he want from you? Damian's hand stilled for a moment. Territory. Respect. A bigger piece of the pie. What pie? The kind that pays for apartments like this. He gestured around us without looking up from the stove. The kind that requires careful negotiation and mutual respect between parties, and if the respect breaks down? Then people get hurt. The simple statement sent chills down my spine. Is that what happened tonight? The respect broke down? Victor sent someone to search your apartment, Damian said, his voice carefully controlled. To see what you might know, what kind of leverage you might represent. It was a violation of our agreement. What agreement? The one where no one touches what's mine. There was that word again. Mine. Every time he said it, it sent heat coursing through me, even as my rational mind protested. I'm not a thing to be owned, I said. No. He turned to face me, his gray eyes intense. You're something far more valuable than that. What am I then? He moved toward me, backing me against the kitchen island. His hands braced on either side of me, trapping me between his arms. You're the one thing in this world that could destroy me, he said softly. And the one thing I can't let go of. Before I could respond, he was kissing me again. This kiss was different from the first, deeper, hungrier, desperate in a way that spoke of fear and relief and possessiveness all rolled into one. I kissed him back with equal desperation, my hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. The events of the night had stripped away my defenses, leaving me raw and needy and aching for his touch. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. This is insane, I whispered against his lips. Probably. His forehead rested against mine. Do you care? I should. But you don't. No. I reached up to touch his face, my thumb tracing over the cut on his cheek. I don't care about anything except this. You. Us. His smile was triumphant and tender all at once. Then we're both lost. Maybe being lost isn't so bad, I said. If we're lost together. He kissed me again, softer this time, full of promises I wasn't sure he could keep. But in that moment, with his arms around me and the city sparkling beyond the windows, I let myself believe that everything would be okay. That was my first mistake. The second was not noticing the small white envelope that had been slipped under his front door while we were in the kitchen, too wrapped up in each other to hear the soft whisper of paper against marble. It wasn't until the next morning that we found it, and by then, Viktor Kozlov had already made his next move. The envelope contained a single photograph, me, walking out of my apartment building that morning before work, completely unaware that I was being watched. On the back, in neat block letters, was a message that made my blood turn to ice, beautiful girl. Such a shame if something happened to her. We should meet to discuss terms. V. You're not leaving this building. Damian's voice was steel wrapped in silk, but I could hear the barely controlled fury underneath. He stood between me and the elevator, his tall frame blocking any hope of escape, the threatening photograph still clutched in his hand. You can't keep me prisoner, I said, trying to keep my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. The image of myself walking innocently to work, completely unaware I was being stalked, had shattered the illusion of safety I'd been clinging to. I can and I will. His gray eyes were storm clouds, dark and dangerous. Victor has made his position clear. You're a target now, Lila. That means you don't go anywhere without me. For how long? Forever? I paced across his living room like a caged animal, the walls of the penthouse suddenly feeling more like prison bars than luxury. I have a life, Damian. I have responsibilities. Your brother's tuition is paid. Your house is safe. What other responsibilities do you have that are worth dying for? The blunt question stopped me cold. When he put it like that, what did I have? A job I'd already quit, friends I barely had time to see, a routine built around survival rather than living. That's not the point, I said weakly. Isn't it? He moved closer, his presence filling the space between us. Tell me what's worth more than your life, and I'll consider it. I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again. Because the truth was, there wasn't anything. The realization was as terrifying as Victor's threat. This is what you wanted, isn't it? I said instead, anger flaring hot in my chest. To make me completely dependent on you. To cut me off from everything else until you're all I have left. Something flickered in his expression, hurt, maybe, or disappointment. Is that what you think? That this is some elaborate manipulation? Isn't it? But even as I said it, I knew I was being unfair. He hadn't orchestrated the break-in, hadn't forced Victor to threaten me. If anything, his enemy seeing me as leverage was probably the last thing he wanted. Sit down, he said quietly. I don't want to. Sit down. The command in his voice sent shivers down my spine. I sank onto the leather sofa, my body responding to his authority even as my mind rebelled against it. He sat across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Let me tell you a story about Viktor Kozlov. I don't need stories. I need answers. The story is the answer. His voice was patient but firm. 5 years ago, Victor's organization and mine had a territorial dispute. Nothing unusual, these things happen in business. But Victor decided to make it personal. I waited, sensing there was more. He targeted my younger sister. The words hit me like a physical blow. You have a sister? Had. The past tense was a knife twist. Elena. She was 22, fresh out of college, working at an art gallery in Soho. She had nothing to do with my business, knew nothing about what I did. But Victor saw her as a weakness he could exploit. My heart was already sinking, but I had to ask. What happened? He had her kidnapped. Used her to try to force me out of several lucrative contracts. Damian's hands clenched into fists. I gave him what he wanted. Every territory, every deal, every concession he demanded. But it wasn't enough. Damian. I reached for him instinctively, but he pulled back. He killed her anyway. To prove a point. To show that crossing him had consequences beyond business losses. The raw pain in his voice made my chest ache. I could see it now, why he was so protective, why the idea of someone threatening me had triggered such a violent response. I represented his worst nightmare happening all over again. That's why you don't want me to leave, I said softly. I won't lose you the way I lost her. His eyes met mine, and I saw depths of grief and rage that took my breath away. I can't. My anger evaporated, replaced by something much more complex. Understanding, maybe. And a love so fierce it scared me. I'm not your sister, I said gently. No. You're not. He looked at me with an intensity that made my skin burn. You're something else entirely. Something I never planned for. What am I to you, Damian? He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like he was memorizing every detail. You're the reason I wake up in the morning. You're the first person who's made me want something more than revenge. The admission hung between us, raw and honest and terrifying in its implications. I could feel the weight of his need, his desperation to protect me, and it was both thrilling and suffocating. "I need some air," I said, standing abruptly. "Lila. Just give me a minute. Please." I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, pressing my palms against the cool glass. The city stretched out below me, full of people living their ordinary lives, unaware that in a penthouse high above them, a girl from Queens was falling in love with a dangerous man who might get her killed. "There's something else you need to know," Damian said behind me. I closed my eyes, bracing for whatever new revelation would shatter my world further. "What?" "Your father's construction company. Contracts that failed, the debts that forced him to mortgage your house." My blood turned to ice. "What about them?" "Some of those contracts were mine." I turned slowly, hoping I'd misheard. But the guilt written across his face told me everything I needed to know. "You destroyed my father's business?" "Not intentionally. But yes, my people were responsible for several of his contracts being cancelled. It was business, nothing personal, but it killed him." The words came out as a whisper. The stress, the financial pressure, the shame of failing, it gave him a heart attack. "Lila, I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" "That your business decisions had consequences? That real people got hurt when you played your power games?" I felt like I was going to be sick. Everything, the job offer, the rescue, the protection, it was all built on a foundation of guilt. He hadn't saved me out of desire or love. He'd saved me because he felt responsible for destroying my family. "It wasn't like that," he said, moving toward me. "Don't." I held up a hand to stop him. "Don't touch me. Don't lie to me anymore." "I've never lied to you." "You've never told me the truth either." Hot tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "How long have you known?" "Since that first night?" His silence was answer enough. "You've been watching me. Researching me. You knew exactly what to offer, exactly how much I needed, because you knew it was your fault I needed it in the first place." "That's not why." "Then why?" I spun to face him fully, my voice rising with each word. "Why the job? Why the protection? Why any of it?" "Because I'm falling in love with you." The words exploded between us like a bomb. We both stood frozen, the admission hanging in the air between us, too big and too dangerous to take back. "You don't get to say that," I whispered. "Not now. Not after this. It's the truth. The truth is that you feel guilty. The truth is that you're trying to buy your way out of the responsibility for what happened to my family. The truth," he said, stepping closer despite my protests, "is that guilt brought you to my attention, but it's not why you're still here. It's not why I can't think about anything but you. It's not why the thought of Victor hurting you makes me want to burn this entire city to the ground." His voice was raw with emotion, his usually perfect composure cracking. But I was too hurt, too betrayed, to care about his pain. "I can't do this," I said, backing toward the elevator. "I can't be with someone who destroyed my family and then tried to save me out of guilt." "Where are you going to go?" he called after me. "Victor is still out there. You're still in danger." "Then I'll figure it out myself. Like I always have." "Lila, please." But I was already in the elevator, jamming my finger on the button for the lobby. The doors started to close, and I saw him standing in his perfect penthouse, looking more lost and broken than I'd ever seen him. The sight almost made me change my mind. Almost. But then I remembered my father, working himself into an early grave trying to save a business that Damian's people had systematically destroyed. I remembered the stress lines around his eyes in those final months, the way he'd aged a decade in the span of a year. The doors closed with a soft ding, cutting off my view of Damian's stricken face. I made it halfway across the lobby before the full weight of my situation hit me. I had nowhere to go. My apartment was compromised, my job was gone, and somewhere out there, Viktor Kozlov was waiting for an opportunity to use me against the man I was falling for despite myself. The man who had destroyed my father. My phone, the work phone Damian had given me, buzzed with a text message. "I know you're hurt. I know you hate me. But please don't let your anger get you killed. Come back, and we'll figure this out together. D. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to go back upstairs, to let him wrap me in his arms and make me forget about everything except the way he made me feel. But a bigger part of me knew that if I went back now, I'd never leave again. I'd become completely absorbed into his world, his protection, his guilt-driven obsession. Another text came through. At least let me send security to watch over you. Please, Lila. I'm begging you. My pride warred with my common sense. I was angry and hurt and betrayed, but I wasn't stupid. Viktor Kozlov was still out there, and I was still a target. Fine. But I'm not coming back. This is over, Damian. I sent the message and immediately turned off the phone, not wanting to see his response. Then I walked out of his building and into the uncertain morning light. I had enough money from the signing bonus to check into a decent hotel, at least for a few days while I figured out my next move. The Marriott in Midtown wasn't luxurious, but it was safe and anonymous. As I checked in, I tried not to think about the way Damian had looked when I'd walked away. Tried not to remember the pain in his voice when he'd told me about his sister. Tried not to acknowledge the voice in my head that whispered I was making a mistake. But it was hard to ignore the ache in my chest, the feeling that I'd just walked away from the best and worst thing that had ever happened to me. The hotel room was generic and impersonal, nothing like the warmth and luxury of Damian's penthouse. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let the tears come, tears for my father, for the family home I'd fought so hard to save, for the complicated man who'd saved and betrayed me in the same breath. I cried until I was empty, until there was nothing left but exhaustion and a hollow ache where my heart used to be. When I finally stopped, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The hotel room phone was blinking with a message. I hadn't given anyone this number. Hadn't even known what it was myself until the desk clerk had written it down for me. With shaking hands, I picked up the receiver and dialed voicemail. Viktor Kozlov's accented voice filled the small room, smooth and cultured and absolutely terrifying. Miss Hayes. How lovely to finally speak with you directly. I trust you're comfortable in your new accommodations? The Marriott is adequate, though not quite up to the standards you've become accustomed to, I'm sure. My heart stopped. He knew where I was. Somehow, he'd found me within hours of checking in. I have a proposition for you, the message continued. Meet me tomorrow night. 8 o'clock. The address will be texted to your personal phone. Yes, I have that number too. Come alone, and we can discuss your future. Fail to appear, and I'll be forced to collect you myself. And Miss Hayes? When I collect people, they don't always arrive in the same condition they left in. The line went dead. I sat frozen on the hotel bed, the receiver still pressed to my ear, Viktor's threats echoing in my mind. He'd found me. Despite Damian's security, despite changing hotels, despite trying to disappear, Viktor had found me in a matter of hours. My personal phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. An address in Brooklyn, along with a single word, tomorrow. I stared at the message, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I was trapped. If I went to meet Viktor, I was probably walking into a death trap. If I didn't go, he'd come for me anyway. But there was a third option. One that my pride had been fighting against all day. I could call Damian. I turned the work phone back on, ignoring the 17 missed calls and dozen text messages that immediately flooded in. Instead, I called his number with trembling fingers. He answered on the first ring. Lila? Thank God. Are you? He found me, I said, cutting him off. Viktor. He left a message at my hotel. He wants to meet tomorrow night. The silence on the other end of the line was terrifying in its intensity. What hotel? Damian's voice was deadly quiet. Marriott Midtown. Room 1247. I'm coming to get you. Damian, We'll talk when I get there. Don't leave that room. Don't answer the door for anyone but me. Do you understand? I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Yes. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead, leaving me alone with my fear and the growing realization that I'd made a terrible mistake. In trying to prove my independence, I'd walked straight into Victor's trap, but more than that, I'd hurt the one person who was trying to protect me. The one person who might actually love me, despite all his flaws and secrets and dangerous connections. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, counting the minutes until Damian arrived, and praying that it wasn't already too late. Thank you for staying tuned and watching this story till the end. If you enjoyed this, kindly leave a comment on your favorite part and don't forget to subscribe. Watch out for part 2.